stop everything because the one sentence meant to defend Prince Harry didn't just backfire, it exposed the entire game, collapsed Meghan Markle's strategy, and quietly confirmed what the palace had been saying all along. And the most shocking part? The proof wasn't leaked. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't discovered by insiders. It was written, signed, and released by Harry's own team in an official statement. Read that again. The evidence didn't come from critics. It came from inside the operation itself. Now here's where it gets dangerous. That single phrase over the weekend doesn't sound explosive at first. It sounds harmless, routine, almost forgettable. But in a story built on timing, deadlines, and power, that phrase becomes a loaded weapon. Because while the statement was trying to accuse the palace of withdrawing an offer at the last moment, it quietly admitted something far more damaging. The acceptance came after the deadline, after Friday, after the window closed, after the decision had already been made. And suddenly, the narrative flips. Completely think about it. Why would a professionally written statement include a detail that contradicts its own accusation? Why would Harry's own spokesperson confirm the timeline that proves the palace didn't act last minute at all? This isn't just a mistake. It feels like a crack, a slip, a moment where the truth pushed through the carefully managed narrative and refused to stay buried. But this wasn't just about a place to stay. That's the distraction. That's the surface level story. Because behind the accommodation drama was something much bigger, much more calculated, and far more fragile. Meghan Markle's entire 2026 commercial strategy was orbiting this UK visit like everything depended on it, because it did. Not as a family reunion, not as a personal trip, as a brand operation. A carefully staged return designed to reconnect her image with royal prestige, to be photographed, to be seen, to be linked once again with the institution that gives her brand its most valuable currency, association. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. That strategy required one key condition: security. Full, official, unquestioned security. Not just for safety, but for legitimacy. Because without it, the optics fall apart. Without it, the message weakens. Without it, the royal magic doesn't translate. But the problem, that outcome had already been decided. Not once, not twice, 3 times in court. Rejected, closed, finished, and yet the strategy moved forward anyway, as if the ruling didn't exist, as if something might change, as if pressure, timing, or public narrative could somehow bend a legal reality. So ask yourself this: was this ever about safety, or was it leverage? Because while the public saw a dispute over protection, the timeline shows something else entirely. Harry spending the entire week arranging alternative security, delaying, waiting, not accepting the accommodation, not locking anything in, and only after those arrangements were in place, only then accepting the offer. Over the weekend, too late, and that's the moment everything collapses. Quietly, logically, irreversibly, because now the accusation doesn't hold. The palace didn't pull anything at the last second. The deadline passed. The response came after. The offer expired. And the statement proving it came from the same side making the claim. That's not a clash of narratives anymore. That's a documented contradiction. But the deeper question starts to emerge, and it doesn't go away. If the security outcome wasn't going to change, if the courts had already ruled, if the review hadn't even been completed after months, then when did the strategy become impossible? Not publicly, not visibly. Internally, quietly, at what point did someone inside that operation realize this entire plan was built on something that wasn't going to happen? And more importantly, who chose to move forward anyway? Because what we're watching isn't just a failed visit, it's something more revealing. A strategy built on a condition that didn't exist. A narrative that collapses under its own timeline. And a statement that, instead of defending the position, ends up exposing the truth hiding underneath it. And just when it looked like the damage couldn't go any deeper, the next 24 hours detonated everything. Because while that statement was still circulating, while analysts, insiders, and critics were still dissecting that one fatal phrase, another bomb dropped. A courtroom ruling. Cold, clinical, final. And it didn't just weaken Harry's position, it erased it. 46 days of trial, 987 allegations, and then one sentence from the judge that cut through all of it: not proved, not partially proven, not misunderstood, not misinterpreted, simply not proved. And in legal terms, that's not a gray area, that's a dead end. But here's where the tension explodes again, because Harry didn't accept that outcome quietly. He didn't frame it as a loss of evidence or a failure to meet the burden of proof. No, he called it a whitewash, a word that doesn't just challenge the result, it challenges the system itself. It suggests bias. Protection, a rigged process. Now pause there, because that's not just emotional language. That's a strategic escalation, and it raises a dangerous contradiction. On one side, the court says the claims weren't proven. On the other, Harry implies the court can't be trusted. Two completely different realities colliding in public. And while that might play as a bold narrative move, it comes with consequences, real ones. Because the same system being accused of failure is the one about to decide something far more expensive. Costs. $50 million. That's the number now sitting in the middle of this storm. Not speculation, not rumor, declared legal costs. And more importantly, potentially recoverable. Because this isn't just about losing a case, it's about how that loss gets paid for. Standard recovery would already be painful. But indemnity recovery? That's where it becomes something else entirely. Because under indemnity, the bar drops. The winning side doesn't have to prove every cost was necessary, just that it was reasonably incurred. And that opens the door wider, much wider. And there's precedent, not theory precedent. A similar case where tens of millions were recovered under the same mechanism. So now imagine the pressure building behind the scenes. A brand already dealing with the collapsing commercial moment. A failed UK strategy that produced zero of the visibility it needed. No photographs, no royal association, no magic, just headlines about disputes, contradictions, and absence. And layered on top of that potential exposure to a legal bill that could reach into tens of millions. That's not a setback. That's structural stress. Because this is where everything starts to connect in a way that's impossible to ignore. The missed deadline, the contradictory statement, the failed security demand, the court ruling, the whitewash accusation, the cost exposure. These aren't separate events. They form a pattern, a sequence, each one amplifying the next, each one tightening the pressure. And at the center of it all is a strategy that was supposed to restore value, but instead revealed vulnerability. And Meghan Markle's position in all of this becomes impossible to separate, because the entire operation, every move, every delay, every condition was tied to a single outcome, reconnecting her brand to royal relevance. That was the prize. That was the objective. And instead of achieving it, this sequence did the opposite. It publicly documented the distance, the separation, the inability to access the very thing the strategy depended on. No presence in the UK, no alignment with the institution, no reinforcement of status, just a void where the moment was supposed to be. And that void speaks louder than any appearance ever could. Because in high-level strategy, absence isn't neutral. It's information. It tells partners, observers, and critics exactly what's not happening. And what's not happening here is just as important as everything that did. The connection wasn't restored. The access wasn't granted. The conditions weren't met. And the plan built months in advance collapsed in real time in full public view. So now the question changes. It's no longer about what went wrong in a single week. It's about what this reveals going forward. Because when a strategy fails this visibly, this completely, this documentably, it doesn't just disappear. It leaves a trail, a record, a pattern others can read, analyze, and act on. And that's where the tension refuses to settle. Because the documents are public, the timelines are fixed, the statements are on record, and the consequences still unfolding. So here's the part no one can quietly move past. If the legal outcome was already decided, if the security demand was never going to be met, if the acceptance came after the deadline, and if the entire commercial strategy depended on those exact conditions, then this wasn't just a miscalculation. It was a move made knowing the ground wasn't there. And that raises the one question that keeps echoing long after everything else fades. If the outcome was predictable, then why was the risk taken anyway? Because whatever the answer is, it hasn't been said out loud yet.